I recently discovered an article that I want to go over, one that was written about the upcoming Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim movie that'll be coming out in December. Now, I don't know if I'd say this is a recent article at this point. It came out in the middle of June of this year, so at this point we're talking 2.5 months ago. But ladies and gentlemen, this article is so offensive that I simply had to do a video on it, because this article encapsulates so much of what is wrong with the people that are currently making these movies and shows like Rings of Power. It encapsulates what's wrong with their mentality, their mindset, when they're adapting anything that came from a book or came from an author or a writer who is vastly superior to them. This article encapsulates the mentality of not just the people in Hollywood and the motives they have whenever they're adapting any beloved franchise, but also a lot of these so-called entertainment journalists, a lot of these so-called fans, and their mindset whenever an adaptation is being made, which is essentially that these entertainment journalists or these professional critics, they are not fans. And in this case here, we're talking Lord of the Rings. These journalists, they are not fans of Lord of the Rings. When they see that an adaptation for Lord of the Rings is being made, their interest is not in seeing a faithful, respectful adaptation of Tolkien's work, but rather their interest is to see their own personal modern messaging put into it. They want to see their own ideology put into it. They want to see themselves on screen. To them, it is not about respecting Tolkien. It is not about respecting the world of Middle-earth at all. Okay, so let's get to the article. It's from ScreenRant.com. I discovered this article a few days ago. I was watching a video by Disparu, great channel, real funny person, and he was going over some of the stuff that was written in this article, and when I saw it, I said, I have to do a video on this. And again, this is from Screen Rant. It's from June 14th of this year, so middle of June. You're talking 2.5 months ago now. And here's the title of the article. And I have to warn you folks, I might be pretty angry reading this. Step aside, Galadriel. War of the Rohirrim will be the fempowerment story Lord of the Rings actually needed. And folks, I'll be speaking mostly in code here. I'll be dead honest, I've been on YouTube for a little over a year, and I still don't quite understand the rules. I've heard before that if you swear early on in your video, then the algorithm's not going to like your video that much. I've heard that there are certain words where if you say them in your video, that also will hurt you in the YouTube algorithm. I don't know. I'm honestly still figuring out how all that stuff works, but so instead of using this word here, I'll be using fempowerment or female empowerment or something like that, because I think this is one of those buzzwords. I don't know whether YouTube likes hearing it or not. Alright, let's start this article. The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim will introduce a new female protagonist, and she may be the best possible fempowerment icon for the Lord of the Rings franchise. Okay, let me just stop right here. Why does the Lord of the Rings franchise need a fempowerment icon? Why? You do realize that Lord of the Rings is the most popular fantasy story out there, and one of the most popular stories out there, period. Maybe the most popular story. And you do realize that Lord of the Rings already has an enormous fan base without any of this current day fempowerment messaging. It already had a huge fan base without any of that stuff in it. So why exactly does this stuff need to be injected into it? And then the writer says, Tolkien's books were woefully short on prominent female characters, with a select few including Éowyn from Rohan and the elf Galadriel. Tolkien's books were woefully short on prominent female characters. And this right here, this is the first sign that the writer of this article is not a Lord of the Rings fan. Because this so-called Lord of the Rings fan is attacking the author of the Lord of the Rings right here. This is what these people do. They claim to be fans, in this case fans of Lord of the Rings, but then shortly after claiming that, they will proceed to attack that IP or that story. They'll proceed to attack the creator of that story. Because that creator, in this case Tolkien, he's not meeting their current day sensibilities, their current day checklist of things that you need to have in a story now. Whether it be it's not diverse enough, whether it be there's not enough female characters, whether it be there's not enough girl bosses in the story, whether it shows men and women in traditional gender roles, whether this literary masterpiece, this timeless masterpiece, doesn't have any current day modern messaging in it, like in this case fempowerment. And I talked a little bit about this in a video not too long ago. Yes, there's a lot more male characters in Lord of the Rings than there are female characters. There's not a whole lot of female characters in there. And I don't care if you don't like it. This is not your story, this is Tolkien's story. So if you're going to make any adaptation of Tolkien's work, the good, respectful thing of you to do would be to stay faithful to what Tolkien wrote, to what Tolkien's vision was. But does this so-called Lord of the Rings fan want to stay faithful to Tolkien? Well, let's continue reading. As stated, Tolkien's books were woefully short on prominent female characters. For this reason, recent screen adaptations have attempted to make some changes. Lord of the Rings of Power leaned into Galadriel's warrior status, which Galadriel was never a warrior in Tolkien's books. But this has been overall controversial, and rightly so, because again, it's not accurate to Tolkien's writings. However, the War of the Rohirrim Hera may be a different story. So no, the writer of this article, their priority is not to stay faithful to Tolkien, not to stay faithful to his writings. Even though Tolkien's original writings gained an enormous fan base just as they were, without all this fempowerment or any other modern messaging that you're seeing Amazon putting into Rings of Power and that looks like you're seeing Warner Brothers put into War of the Rohirrim. The upcoming anime movie Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim will be set about 200 years before the events of Frodo's story. Early in the film's production, it was said that it would follow the war between Rohan's Helm Hammerhand and the Dunlendings. While this is still true, it has been revealed that the War of the Rohirrim will center more on Helm's daughter, who was unnamed in Tolkien's version of the story. While such changes or exceptions of the Lord of the Rings canon are typically frowned upon, this may be an exception. The article keeps saying that people may be fine with this change. Galadriel's warrior status has been controversial, but War of the Rohirrim's Hera may be a different story. Changes to Lord of the Rings canon are typically frowned upon, this may be an exception. And here's another little offensive statement in this paragraph. War of the Rohirrim will center more on Helm's daughter, who is unnamed in Tolkien's version of the story. Tolkien was the creator of that story. What are you talking about, Tolkien's version of the story? Tolkien was the writer of that story, therefore there is only Tolkien's version of that story. There's only Tolkien's version of that story, and then there's going to be Warner Brothers' modernized, perverted version of that story. But that modernized perversion of the story of Helm Hammerhand is not the true version of the story. It is what Tolkien wrote in the appendices. Tolkien's the one who wrote the story, therefore it's his. It belongs to him. And only him. And this is a big problem I have with the people at Amazon and the people at Warner Brothers. In their minds, they think Lord of the Rings belongs to them. They think they own it. And because of that, it's no wonder that Lord of the Rings is being disrespected on the level that it is right now. 20 minutes of the War of the Rohirrim was screened at an Annecy panel, and during this short preview, the film's new protagonist was introduced. While the story will follow Helm Hammerhand and his war against the Dunlendings, which was one of the more exciting stories involving Rohan from Tolkien's Legendarium, the film will more specifically center around Helm's daughter Hera. This is an interesting change since in canon the fateful war began when Hammerhand refused to marry his daughter to the Dunlending Lord Wolf. Now they're going to be centering around Hera, but let me read you what Tolkien wrote about Helm's daughter. And it's really just one sentence written about her, and she doesn't even have a name. To one of these councils Freka rode with many men, and he asked the hand of Helm's daughter for his son Wolf. But Helm said, "You have grown big since you were last here, but it is mostly fat, I guess." And men laughed at that, for Freka was wide in the belt, and instead of focusing on Helm Hammerhand, they're going to focus on his daughter, who's going to be a typical modern-day girl boss. Now, those of you who love this decision, you're going to tell me that I have a problem with women and that I'm intimidated by strong women. No, I do not have a problem with strong female characters, nor do any other Lord of the Rings fans out there. Nobody had a problem when Éowyn killed the Witch King. The problem we have here is that they're changing what Tolkien originally wrote, and the reason why they're doing that is to inject their own personal ideology into somebody else's work, in this case Tolkien's work. In particular, they're injecting their own fempowerment or their female empowerment ideology into Tolkien's work. And the act of taking somebody else's work and putting your personal ideology into it, that is disgusting and it is unforgivable. That's why we Lord of the Rings fans have a problem with this. They are changing Tolkien's timeless story, his timeless work, in order to follow current day trends in mainstream entertainment. Trends that frankly audiences are getting sick and tired of at this point, and they're getting bored of. Helm's daughter had little else to do with the story in Tolkien's version of events. There's that phrase again, Tolkien's version of events. Tolkien is the creator of this story. There is only Tolkien's version of the events. Again, these people think they own Lord of the Rings. They think Lord of the Rings belongs to them. No, it belongs to Tolkien. It is not your story, it is Tolkien's story. Tolkien is the creator of Middle-earth. People like you, people at Amazon, people at Warner Brothers, they are ideological parasites who want to take Tolkien's work and turn it into a platform. And Lord of the Rings fans are rightly upset about it. Helm's daughter had little else to do with the story in Tolkien's version of events, but War of the Rohirrim is making a change. It says a story is making a change like it's a good thing. And this sort of statement, this is a telltale sign that the person who wrote this article is not a Lord of the Rings fan. Nor are the people at Amazon for that matter, nor the people who defend Rings of Power, nor the people at Warner Brothers. To answer how I know they're not fans, let me just ask you this very simple common sense question. If they really were fans of Lord of the Rings, why do they want to change it so much? Why? Why are they so bent on changing this timeless masterpiece that already has an enormous fan base to begin with? And don't give me any of this, we need to update it for modern audiences crap. There is no such thing as a modern audience, there's just the audience, and that audience is exactly the same now as it has been 50 years ago. All the audience wants is good stories, like Lord of the Rings as Tolkien wrote it. They do not want a perverted version of Lord of the Rings that has been updated for modern audiences written by ideological parasites. And again, Tolkien didn't have a whole lot of female characters in his story. I don't care if you don't like that. It is his story, so when you adapt his work, you stick to his writings, period. And if you don't like that his stories don't meet your modern day sensibilities, you're free to write your own story. And in your story, you can do whatever you want. But again, taking somebody else's story and putting your ideology into it, turning somebody else's story into a platform for your personal ideology, that is unforgivable. The screening revealed that the newly dubbed Hera would take on a warrior role. Shocking. Modern writing dictates that every female character needs to be a strong woman girl boss, forced into a position of leadership following Hammerhand's decisions. This is not at all how Tolkien wrote the story in the appendices. This is a change they made to update it for modern audiences. But it gets more offensive. The character will call on an all-female tribe of fighters for help, transforming this Lord of the Rings tale into the sort of fempowerment story the franchise needs. Why does Lord of the Rings need a female empowerment story? Why does it need that? Let me remind you that again, Lord of the Rings already had an enormous fan base, well before Amazon came along, trying to come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote, or before Warner Brothers came along here, trying to tell the female empowerment story that the franchise apparently needs. Secondly, all-female tribe of fighters. That did not exist in Tolkien's work. Again, they're updating it for modern audiences, quote-unquote. They threw that in there because we need to have girl bosses in every story now. I'll jump to Slash Film. This was a statement from over a year ago about the movie. Later, another clip shows the politics at play in Edoras, with the Lord of Rohan wanting to erase a history of a group of female warriors and banner women to the king, a prelude of things to come. This is not a part of Tolkien's writings. This is something they put in there because modern writing requires that we need to have strong female characters smashing the patriarchy. And while we're on the topic of fempowerment, let's see what Tolkien wrote about fempowerment, or what he thought about it. So I got my Letters of Tolkien book out, and I'm going to read you an excerpt from letter 53. This was from December 9th of 1943, and this letter was written to his son Christopher. And this was during World War II. Christopher Tolkien, he was training down in Africa. But what does Tolkien write about the fempowerment movement? Let's see here. Humph. Well, I wonder, if we survive this war, if there will be any niche, even of sufferance, left for reactionary back numbers like me and you. The bigger things get, the smaller and duller or flatter the globe gets. It is getting to be all one blasted little provincial suburb. When they have introduced American sanitation, morale pep, feminism, and mass production throughout the Near East, Middle East, Far East, USSR, the Pampas, El Gran Chaco, the Danubian Basin, Equatorial Africa, hither further and inner Mumboland, Gondwana land Laza, and the villages of the darkest Berkshire, how happy we shall be. At any rate, it ought to cut down travel. And this is in 1943, folks. A lot of people thought that that feminism started basically in the 1960s. Tolkien's mentioning feminism here during World War II, a good couple decades before the 1960s. But based on that quote, it doesn't sound to me like Tolkien was a fan of the fempowerment movement. And if he wasn't a fan of it, then why are you injecting that into his work?
Well, we didn't want to put any of our own, and certainly in terms of the thematic material, we didn't want to put any of our own baggage. I mean, we had no interest in putting our messages into this movie, but we thought that we should honor Tolkien by putting his messages into it.
Folks, thank God the Lord of the Rings trilogy was made 25 years ago and not today. If it was made today, it would have been terrible. So in the article says the Rings of Power's Galadriel has been controversial, but Hera may be easier to accept. There's that phrase again, may be easier to accept. Maybe. Hera being an original imagining of Helm Hammerhand's daughter will make changes easier to swallow. No it won't. This is the same typical perverting of somebody else's work, injecting your ideology in someone else's work. In this case, taking a story of Helm Hammerhand turning it into a girl boss bait and switch. No, this is no different from what other countless adaptations have been doing, including Rings of Power. So then here in the next paragraph they try to argue that this isn't the first time that they've tried to change Lord of the Rings in order to give women more prominent roles. Here isn't Hollywood's first attempt at giving female characters a more prominent role in The Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson's trilogy made Arwen a much stronger feature of the story, making her part of Frodo's rescue when she didn't even have lines in Tolkien's books. As I remember, yes, she did have lines. And yes, Arwen was not part of the flight to the Ford. Frodo was running from the Nazgul by himself. Arwen was not part of that. But here's the difference. They did not change the story so that Arwen was suddenly the main character, even though the story is about Frodo and Sam, it's about Aragorn. In the story of Helm Hammerhand, they're instead making Hammerhand's unnamed daughter the main character. That's a much bigger change than giving Arwen a little more screen time in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And yes, as a Lord of the Rings fan, no, I don't like seeing changes made from the original writings. But the changes made in Peter Jackson's trilogy are nowhere near the same level of what Rings of Power has done or what this War of the Rohirrim movie is doing. Then Prime Video's Lord of the Rings Rings of Power has made Galadriel far more warrior-like than she has typically been portrayed in the past. Yeah, Galadriel was never a warrior in Tolkien's writings. This has been a somewhat controversial change. No, it's been an extremely controversial change. Because again, Galadriel was not a warrior in Tolkien's writings. She was powerful, she had one of the elven rings, but she wasn't powerful in the sense that she was a warrior. Amazon made that change in order to turn her into your typical current-day girl boss. While Tolkien once described Galadriel as Amazonian in the First Age, Amazon has been accused of taking this too far for pandering. And the people defending Rings of Power and what they did with Galadriel, they're taking some open-ended statements that Tolkien made in the past and they're trying to use those to convince us that, yes, Galadriel was a girl boss, and what Amazon did with Galadriel is really exactly how Tolkien wrote her. There was one statement where Tolkien was saying that Galadriel often participated in athletic feats, and they're saying therefore she must have been a warrior, which athletic feats and combat are not quite the same thing. But here comes the most offensive statement of this entire article. Rather than explicitly changing a character, War of the Rohirrim pulls the curtain back a little further, allowing audiences to observe a part of the story that Tolkien might have overlooked. Tolkien created a very detailed fantasy world, one with its own history, with its own mythology, very detailed history. He made up his own languages for that world. And you're telling me that Tolkien overlooked this daughter of Helm Hammerhand. Maybe she was only mentioned in one sentence because she wasn't all that relevant to the story beyond that. And secondly, this statement that Tolkien might have overlooked this part of the story. Talk about disrespectful, folks. And again, statements like this, they are telltale signs that these people are not Lord of the Rings fans. They are ideologues who want to take Lord of the Rings and turn it into a platform. As I said, if these people really were Lord of the Rings fans, then why do they want to change it so much? Simple question. These people, they act like Lord of the Rings fans, they say they're Lord of the Rings fans, but then shortly after that, they go out insulting the story, insulting the creator, because he's not meeting modern day sensibilities. In this case, not having enough female characters in his story, not having enough girl bosses in his story, not having enough empowerment in his story. I don't care at all if you don't like that. If you don't like it, you can write your own story. But if you're adapting Tolkien's story, you stick to Tolkien's writings and Tolkien's vision. Period. And then we have this dumb statement here. The expansion of Hera's character may be less upsetting to Tolkien enthusiasts since giving her a name and a warrior-like role doesn't technically contradict anything the author wrote. And this is another thing that these activists and these ideological parasites do. They look for anything in the original work, in this case Tolkien's work. They look for anything in Tolkien's writings that sounds just a little bit open-ended. Or they look for anything where there's not quite as much detail. And whenever they find stuff that's a little more open-ended, they view that as an opportunity to inject their ideology into his work. Patrick McKay, one of the showrunners for Rings of Power, he recently said the whole idea of doing a show in the Second Age was that it's not a fixed target. There's an enormous amount of room for creation and improv within a loose framework. In other words, there's not a lot of detail on the Second Age, and therefore that presents us a lot of opportunity to write our own stories, to come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote, and more specifically, to inject our current day ideologies into Tolkien's work. And on the same note, the story of Helm Hammerhand, it's only about 2 pages long. That story also doesn't have a whole lot of detail, and that gives the people working on that story plenty of opportunity to inject their ideology into it. Tolkien only has one sentence written on Helm Hammerhand's daughter. She doesn't even have a name. And so as this article states, giving her a name and warrior-like role doesn't technically contradict anything the author wrote. It doesn't technically contradict anything. The logic here is that Tolkien never stated that Helm Hammerhand's daughter was not a girl boss, so we can go ahead and make her a girl boss, and we wouldn't be contradicting his writings. You know, there's kind of a rule in writing that you don't state negatives, that you don't state that something did not happen, and these current ideological parasites, they're using that to their advantage. Logically, if Tolkien never states that Galadriel went to Numenor at any point in the Silmarillion, then we would assume logically that at no point does Galadriel go there. And when it comes to Hammerhand's daughter, if Tolkien never stated that she took up arms and fought in this war, then logically we're going to assume that she did not fight in the war. But these activists, their logic is upside down, and the reason why it's upside down is because that gives them the opportunity to put their current day modern messaging into Lord of the Rings. Tolkien never stated that Helm Hammerhand's daughter was not a girl boss, so we can go ahead and make her a girl boss, and technically we won't be contradicting anything he wrote. And by this very logic, this allows them to do anything they want in the world of Middle-earth. Tolkien never stated that there was no anti-immigration allegories in Numenor, so I guess Amazon, they can go ahead and put that stuff in there. Tolkien never stated that Sauron is not a metaphor for Donald Trump, and Tolkien never stated that Sauron's goal was not to make Middle-earth great again, so I guess they could do that if they wanted. You know the Witch King of Angmar? He has the name Witch and the name King in his name. Witch is female and King is male. You know, Tolkien never stated that the Witch King's pronouns were not they them, so I guess they could make the Witch King's pronouns they them. I better stop, I don't want to give them ideas. But that's the logic that these ideological parasites are using here. If Tolkien never stated that it didn't happen, then we have license to make it happen. Rather than explicitly changing a character, War of the Rohirrim pulls the curtain back a little further, allowing audiences to observe part of the story that Tolkien might have overlooked. Yeah, I read that. That statement was offensive. This shouldn't be too hard to pull off, especially considering Éowyn's role in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, but here's the difference. Tolkien actually wrote that Éowyn took up arms and fought in the War of the Ring. Tolkien actually wrote that Éowyn killed the Witch King. And yes, she did need Merry's help in that fight, but she did kill the Witch King. Tolkien wrote that. And by the way, Lord of the Rings fans who are attacking Rings of Power, none of us had any problem with this. None of us had any problem with Éowyn killing the Witch King and saying, "I am no man." Witch King saying, "No man can kill me." None of us had a problem with it. It was in Tolkien's writings. Perhaps the most significant reason Tolkien enthusiasts could accept the Hair character is her connection to Lord of the Rings' Éowyn. The Shield Maiden of Rohan revealed herself to be a formidable warrior in Return of the King, proving herself by secretly riding into a doomed battle and defeating the Witch King of Angmar. Again, the difference, the stuff Éowyn did, that was actually in Tolkien's writings. That was actually in the story. The stuff they're having Helm Hammerhand's daughter do in this movie, those things did not happen in Tolkien's writings. Éowyn was the best presented female character in Tolkien's central Lord of the Rings story. As a distant descendant of Helm Hammerhand's line, it makes sense that other female warriors would make up her ancestry. Now, just because Éowyn fought doesn't mean other female ancestors of hers fought. The Lord of the Rings of War of the Rohirrim has taken advantage of this, and Éowyn's character is a promised feature of the upcoming film. Miranda Otto, who played the fempowerment icon in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies, will lend her voice to the character in the upcoming anime. So now they're saying that Éowyn is a fempowerment icon. And by the way, Éowyn was still a pretty feminine character. She was not your typical girl boss character that we're seeing repeatedly today. She fell in love with Aragorn. She married Faramir. After the Battle of Minas Tirith, the Battle of Pelennor Fields, Éowyn decided that she didn't want to be a warrior anymore, and she married Faramir. So is she a fempowerment icon? Is she your typical girl boss character that we're seeing today? No. It sounds as if Éowyn will be the film's narrator, as the character presumably tells the tale of another great female warrior of Rohan. Yeah, but Tolkien never wrote that she was a female warrior, but rather it was these modern activists who are taking Tolkien's work and perverting it and turning it into a platform. It's those people who made her into a warrior. This creates an exciting level of cohesion between War of the Rohirrim and Lord of the Rings that should ultimately result in a far more effective fempowerment story than Rings of Power could muster. And that concludes this article. Yeah, make no mistake folks, the people in the access media, the people writing these kinds of articles, these so-called entertainment journalists, they are not Lord of the Rings fans. The people working on Rings of Power, the people at Warner Brothers, they are not Lord of the Rings fans. Because if they really were fans of Lord of the Rings, if they really were fans of Tolkien's writings, then why do they want to change them so much? Why would they want to change this timeless masterpiece that has an enormous fan base to begin with? Why would they want to change it? Why would they want to fix something that's not broken? The answer is very simple. These people are not fans. They're activists. To them, it's not about Lord of the Rings. It's not about respecting Tolkien. It's about putting their own personal ideologies into Tolkien's work. It's about taking Tolkien's work, it's about taking somebody else's work and turning it into a platform. And that is unforgivable. And you can say all you want, just be glad that the original books exist, just be glad the Silmarillion exists. There's no need to be upset about Rings of Power or this upcoming movie. I do not agree at all. When they're perverting Lord of the Rings, we Lord of the Rings fans, we have to call it out. And this is the reason why.
The generation that comes after us now, this will be their memory of Tolkien.
These people in Hollywood, they are trying to revise Lord of the Rings. There's no other way to say it. And articles like this are pretty good examples showing what these people's true intentions are, and showing that they're not real fans. Everyone, I hope you enjoy this video, and I'll see you next time. Take care until then.